Hello everyone and welcome again in the series of sessions on operating system. So, in last few sessions we have seen that different aspects of the operating system. So, where we try to understood what is operating system, what are the types of operating system, and then we touched upon the Linux operating system and we went deep into understanding of the Linux operating system, where we try to understand what is the kernel, then different subcomponents of the kernels, then what is the shell, in general what is the syntax or like structure of Linux operating system, commands. So, all these aspects as of now we have understood. So, now in this particular session we will try to understand how one can start using this operating system. So, there are different commands by which one can start using this operating system. They can start working on the devices powered by the Linux operating system. So, there are different types of commands in the Linux operating system, and here in this session we will practically try to understand how we can use those commands, how they work and so on. So, let us start for this particular sessions, where we will be looking for some of the widely used and useful commands from the operating system, Linux operating system. So, let us start. So, in this particular session we will be looking for the commands from the different sections, like from the basic, like how you can know the system and the user information. Then we will try to see the commands regarding the files and directories, then how to deal with those files with different file permissions and ownership commands. Then we will try to look for the some of the commands from in order to manage the processes in the Linux. Then when you try to write any file containing like text or any data, so how to process on that particular data. So, what are the different commands to text processing in the Linux. Then finally, we will touch upon some of the commands from the memory and network management in the Linux. So, let us start with. So, if one want to understand about their system and user, so what are the commands? Few of the commands we will try to understand. Okay. So, let us say if I want to know which user has been logged in the current session. So, for that there is a command called as the who am I. So, if you want to see the respective output, you just open the terminal, okay, and you just fire this particular command who am I. So, the output of this particular command will show you. So, in this particular case, okay, with the master user we have logged in that particular system. So, this who am I command will help you to know the user who has logged in that particular current environment. You can also observe that whenever you logged into the terminal, there is this particular thing where it shows that okay, there is a master, and on that particular host that particular user has been logged in. Okay. So, through this particular command I can know that this particular user has been logged in to the system. So, where basically such kinds of requirements are there, like when you want to write some automation scripts, those we will see in the next sessions, where such kinds of requirements are necessary, where you require that to know the user. Okay. So, that is about the user. Now, if you want to know about the operating system or your system, like architecture and those aspects of your device or the computer system, then what is the command for that? Okay. So, there is a command called as the uname is used for that purpose. So, if you just open the terminal and you fire this particular uname command, then you get the response like that, okay, for the system which I am using, that is the Linux. And if I want to know more details about the architecture and the operating system kernels and its versions and so many things, you can just put an -a flag to this particular command, okay. Then it will show you the details of the operating system and its architecture. So, you can see that here this is the Linux operating system. Currently it has been like loaded on this particular host, okay, and like the kernel version, okay, this is particular the architecture x86 architecture and so on, right. So, likewise you can get more information from the system perspective by using this particular uname command. Got it? Yeah. So, if you want to know more about the CPU which is present on your system, then what is the corresponding command for that? So, if you fire the lscpu command which gives you the detailed information about the CPU, you can see this particular command we have fired and it has shown the architecture. In this particular case x86 architecture is present and 32-bit or 64-bit. So, which is the vendor? So, the processor is from the Intel vendor, and what is the generation? i5 is the generation from the Intel. So, likewise many and much more information you get when you fire the lscpu command. So, it gives the information about the CPU. So, there are like various instances where you want to know about your system. So, these are like some of the different commands from by which you can get information about the system which you are using. So, there is much more information here as well, okay. Just for the sake purpose I have pick up some of the information, but it gives in detail information about the CPU which is present on your system. So, now let us try to understand, if you want to know about the memory space available on your system, okay, then what is the respective commands. So, here you can see that free is the command by which you can get information about the memory which is available on your system. So, through this command you can get information like total memory available, used memory space or free memory space. So, you just open the terminal and fire this particular command. So, it will provide you the information about the total memory available on your system, how much of it has been used, how much it is free, the shared memory, buffer memory and currently like available memory which you can directly use, right. Along with the like normal memory, it also shows the information of the swap memory as well, right. Now, currently this particular information not like human readable, how much like GB or like MB data. So, if you just pass an parameter to this particular command -h, it means that human readable, okay. So, it will give the information about the memory directly in the GBs or MBs, where we as a human can directly have the inference from it. So, for this particular system which I am using, okay, so that is like one virtual machine, okay, with the Linux operating system, and in that particular system total 3.7 GB is the memory, okay, among which I have used 1.1 GB and 888 MB is free memory, right, currently. So, likewise you can get the much more information about the memory space which is available on your system. So, in this particular things we got to know about, like there are like basic few commands like uname, lscpu, free, which gives you information, some basic information about your system. Okay. So, now let's start to understand another important concepts like how to operate with the files and directories, how to manage those commands, like how to manage with these files and the directories, and what are the corresponding commands for that, right. So, let us start. Basically, as we have studied and discussed earlier, these file management related commands basically deal with the files and directories for the different operations, like creating the file or directory, copying that particular file or directory, or moving the respective like data from one directory to another directory, renaming that, or maybe the deleting. So, like these are some of the operations which we need to do with the files and directories. So, for that, what are the different commands, right. So, before that, let us once again recap what exactly the file in the Linux is. Basically, file is a collection of data that is stored on a disk or in a memory, and we have seen that there are different types of files, right. In Linux, basically everything is a file, like text files or the multimedia files or the device files, everything is mostly files, right. And what exactly the file? It is nothing but the collection of data with respect to that requirement, right. And directory is basically the special file that contains the reference to other files and directories. As I had mentioned earlier, it is something like a folder that organizes files into hierarchical order. So, one particular directory may have the some other directory inside to that, or maybe some files into. We will try to see those things practically. Okay. So, let us start to see like the different associated commands in this aspect. So, let us say I want to know whenever I log into my system, and I want to know that in which directory currently am I. So, what is my present working directory or the current working directory? So, what is the command for that, right. So, if you just open the terminal and put the command like pwd, so it means that present working directory, then it shows you that currently I am in this directory. So, if you open the terminal and fire this particular command, it says that okay, currently you are in the /home/master directory. So, likewise, if I want to know where exactly am I, then you can use the command called as the pwd, right. Now, if I log into that particular, like if I go to that particular directory, and now I want to see what is the content in that particular directory, what is the corresponding command for that. So, in that aspect you can use the command called as a ls. So, you just take an example, as we have seen, in order to know that in which directory you are currently, you fire the pwd command, okay. Then you got to know that okay, currently I am in the master directory, right. Then in that particular directory just fire this ls command. So, as soon as you fire this ls command, it shows that okay, there are like multiple directories present in that particular directory. So, multiple data, maybe this particular data have some like files or maybe the directories, right. So, this is some the overall content which is present in this particular master directory. So, through the ls command I can get to know what is the content in that particular directory, right. Okay. So, if I want to know like more information about about the content in that particular directory, then you can just pass such kinds of flags to this particular ls command. So, in this particular case I am passing -la. A means okay, all information, and L means like in a long format, right. So, I want the information of the like contents in that particular directory in the long format. Long format means that it gives like information, detailed information. So, what are those parameters we will try to understand, and what are the like contents in that particular file. So, those are all contents. So, as we have seen that there were file from like named with Anaconda, then desktop, documents, so and so. So, the list was big. So, all information means that with respect to each file or the directory, okay, what are the corresponding flags. So, if I want to know what, like basically what are these different aspects associated that particular file, okay, or that particular directory. So, here this dot means that, okay, you see that there are some of the files or the directories with a dash dot, right. So, it means that these files are nothing but the hidden files. In Linux, whenever you start the name of the file with the dot, then it consider it as a hidden file. So, in the last slide, if you could see in the same directory, so those hidden files were not present, right, anywhere. But when I try to write this ls-la, okay, it has given me the information about these dot files as well, right. As well as along with that, as I had mentioned, okay, there is some additional information. Let us consider that, okay, this is one particular directory and this additional information is there. So, what exactly this information is about, right. So, the very first these parameters tells about like the ownerships and the permissions of that particular file. Another, this particular parameter tells, okay, so with respect to this particular directory of the file, how many linked are associated. Like in the Linux operating system, as it's the multi-user operating system. So, one file may be shared with different users or maybe with the different directories. There may be the data in that particular file which is linked to another. So, how many links are there with respect to this directory? Then this one is like who is the owner of that particular file. Another parameter like what is the group. Then this is like what is the size, actually this particular size in bytes, right. And another information like that when that particular file has been created. So, likewise detailed information about that particular file or the directory we get with this ls-la command. Got it? We will try to debug more about in successive slides. What are those parameters? What is this D? What is this RW? And everything is mean about. So, we will try to see how to get to know about the groups and those things. We will try to see in the upcoming slides. So, at this moment, you just remember that, okay, if I want to know the more information about the files and the directories in the corresponding directory, I can use the command ls, right. Now, there may be the scenario that if you are currently in one directory and you want to change your directory, right, like we do in Windows operating system, we change from one folder to another folder. So, how we can do it in the Linux, right. So, for that there is a command called as the change directory, right. So, how you can use it? Let us say for example, just open the terminal and just fire the command pwd, where you got to know that, okay, currently you are in the master directory. Now, within this particular directory with the ls command, I got to know that, okay, there are like a different directories are present, right. And from those directory I want to, let us say, change or switch to this particular directory desktop, right. Then you just fire the command cd followed by the directory name to which you want to switch. Okay. You just fire this particular command and you will be directed to this directory. You can see that the cursor, like from this particular, it has been now changed to this one, right. So, it means that, okay, previously you were in the home directory, now you are in the directory whose name is a desktop, okay. And if I just once again run the pwd command, okay, pwd command, then you got to know that, okay, now currently I am in the home, master and desktop directory. So, previously you were in the home master directory, okay, now you are in the desktop directory. Got it? So, if I want to change from one directory to another directory, I will use a command, okay, as I had shown, called as the cd. Fine. Next. So, now like there may be the different scenarios by where you can use this particular command. Okay. So, in Linux operating system, basically you are somewhere in, like maybe in the parent process or the child process of another, like child process whose parent is something different. So, maybe you were maybe at a time one you are working in the same directory, now you want to change that directory to somewhere, right. So, in that particular case, the cd commands helps you in different ways, like currently, let us say currently you are in this particular directory, okay, and somehow you changed, okay, to your home directory, right. So, if you do not provide any parameters to this particular command, okay, so by default it goes to the home directory, always remember that. Okay. So, in the previous slides, okay, we have provided this cd, okay, and then we had provided the path or the directory name to which I want to go. If I do not provide this particular path, okay, then by default actually it goes to home directory, right. And in this particular case, if I want to check, okay, what is the home directory, then in our case, like home master is the home directory for this particular user. Remember that, home directory of user, right. So, now if I want to change the previous directory, let us say currently you are in the one directory, okay, you were working here, some work you were doing, now you change to another directory, okay. So, in this particular case, this was the past directory, just past directory, and this is like current directory. Now, you want to change from this directory to this directory. So, if you just pass this particular dash parameter along with cd command, if you just pass this dot dash parameter, then it takes you from your current directory to the just past directory from where you had landed, right. So, this is also like a very useful trick where you can move from your present directory to the last working directory which you were working, right. Now, let us say another scenario where you do not want to go into the last working directory, rather than you just want to go just one directory above the current directory. Let us take an example. You are currently in the home master, desktop and simple project directory. Now, you want to switch from this directory to just one above directory. Okay. So, in that particular case, you can just put these two dots along with the cd command, right. As soon as you fire this, you can observe that, okay. So, and if you just put the pwd command, then you can see that you have changed to desktop directory, right. So, if you want to just change your directory to just your parent directory, then you can use the cd dot dot. So, in this way, the cd is like with the cd command, change directory command, you can navigate from one directory to another directory and as per your convenience, right. So, this is an use of the cd directory, cd command, fine. Next. So, let us talk about like how one can create a new directory, right. So, there are the different cases where as soon as you log in, if you want to like store some data, you just create the directory, and in that particular directory you start putting your data and start like working in that directory, right. So, in that particular case, how you can create a new directory, right. So, for that there is a command called as the mkdir. So, with this particular command you can create a new directory. Let us try to see in practical way. Okay. Just open the terminal, okay. Just get to know like currently you are in this particular directory, and I got to know that, okay, now at this moment I am in this particular directory and this is the content of my directory as of now, only one single directory is present. Now, then I fire this particular command mkdir and the name of the file which I want, like name of, here in this particular case, directory basically, okay, the name of the directory which I want to create. Okay, you just fire this particular command and your directory will be created with this name testdir. And if you once again try to see the content of that particular directory, so now you can observe that this particular directory has been created in my current directory. So initially there was only one folder, now there are like a two directories present in the desktop directory, right? And similarly with the, if you want to change, then now you, whatever the directory which you have created, now you want to go into that particular directory, then you can use like cd, just put that particular directory name, and now within the cd like a desktop directory there is a test directory and you can navigate there. So in this particular way you can create a directory and navigate to that particular directory, and you can do everything as we had seen in the last commands, like navigation in a different aspects. Okay, so you can do with this one, right? Now let us try to understand, if once you have created the directory and if you want to delete that particular directory, there are like different scenarios where you get such requirement, right? So for that particular case you can use the command like rmdir. In order to create a directory, there was a command called as the mkdir. If I want to remove the directory, then I use the rmdir command, right? So just take an example, the same directory which we had created in the last slides, okay, we have seen that, just because currently this particular directory is the empty one, right? So if that directory is empty, I can delete that particular directory with this rmdir command. So type this particular rmdir command, then the name of that particular directory, and your directory is deleted. So you can see that here this particular directory was present. After we run this particular rmdir testdir, so there is no testdir file, right? It means that that particular file has been deleted, right? Then see, like then there may be the another scenario, okay, where you may need to rename a directory, okay. So in that particular case you may use the command called as the mv. Basically mv is the multi-purpose kind of the command by which you can rename the directory as well as you can move the content of that particular file from the one location to another location. We will try to see the both scenarios, right? You just take an example, okay. Currently you are in this particular directory, okay, in the desktop directory, then you create this testdir with the mkdir directory command. Now this particular testdir directory is available, right? Now rename this particular testdir directory 1 to testdir 2. So in that particular scenario, just use this mv command, then the directory which you want to rename, like a source directory, okay, and then the destination or maybe like the name which you want to rename. In this particular case I just want to rename it from the testdir1 to testdir2. So you can observe that once I fire this particular whole command, okay, then this particular testdir directory has been renamed to testdir2. So in this particular way I can rename a directory, right? So as I had mentioned, if I want to move that content of one file, one directory to another directory or file, okay, in that particular case as well I can use this particular move command, okay. So if once again the same scenario, let's say within the same like a directory there is one testdir directory is there. Now I create another directory with the name as a child, okay. So in this particular case you can see that when I create that particular directory, now the child directory is there, test directory 2 is there, simple project is there, right? So now I move this particular child directory to this test dir2. So for that I use this particular command, right. So the move the directory which I want to move, okay, and then the destination directory, okay. So now in this particular case what will happen, this particular directory will be moved to this directory, okay. Now after running this particular command, if I check the content of the desktop directory itself, okay, then you can see that now this particular child directory is not present, right. And when I go to this particular test2 directory with the cd directory cd test dir2, then you can see that in that particular directory now the child directory is present, right. So in this particular way one can rename and move the one directory to another directory. So as of now we have seen the different commands, okay, to get to know about the file information, like get to know about the operating system, okay. And here in this particular scenario we try to understand different commands like creation of the files and specifically the directories, what are the different commands to manage the directory, like get to know information about where in which directory currently am I. Then if I want to navigate from one directory to another directory, what are the ways to do that, as well as like if I want to rename that particular directory, and if I want to move the contents from the one directory to another directory, all these commands with respect to specifically with respect to the directories we have seen, okay, in this particular like session. So now we will try to understand some of the aspects with respect to files, how you can create the files and what are the operations which you can perform on the that particular file, right. Thank you.